used it was actually part of the Jewish liturgy in Morocco to pray for the Muslims. The rabbis dictated that because they said the victory of the Muslims meant security for Judaism, and the defeat of the Muslims meant a threat to the security of Judaism. So the Jews used to pray for Muslims for victory. And if you read Kohler's book on Jewish theology that was taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Massachusetts at the turn of the century, he said very clearly that that rabbinical tradition teaches that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a vehicle of God. So they actually traditionally believed that. They saw him as a part of providence. They didn't see him as evil, but they did not accept the finality of his messengership because they believed that the Messiah was to come to them, and that would be the... We believe Jesus was the Messiah. They missed the boat. And Jesus was the Messiah. And that's why the Muslims are always amazed at Jews and Christians because, one, we name our children Moses. I've met so many Palestinians named Musa. I mean, what an amazing thing for a Palestinian to name his child Musa after the prophet of the Jews. And yet, have you ever met an Israeli named Muhammad? No. And Rabin's wife, Leah Rabin, because she knew who killed her husband, said, I would rather my children marry Palestinians than some Israelis. Right? So it's rare to see a type of unbiased...
Right, but the historical interaction, you just comment on that a little bit of Jews within Islam. How do you see it, or what is your reading on that?
Well, if you look historically, there are some black periods, but I think in relation to the overall tradition, the Muslim record of the treatment of Jews is extraordinary. It really is. It is extraordinary. The few black periods that existed were always condemned by scholars. The brave scholars like Sidi Ahmed Zarruq from Morocco, when the Watasid kingdom began to persecute the Jews because of the positions that they had achieved during the Marinid period, Beni Marin, they had become ministers. And the Watasiya, who were ministers of Beni Marin, they actually overthrew the government, claiming that they'd let the Jews get too powerful. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq was the only mufti of Fez, the legal jurist, that refused to go along with that and said the Jews are people of Dhimma, we have to protect them, their synagogues are protected. So you do have some black periods, but they were condemned by the righteous scholars, and history has testified that the righteous scholars were on the right side. When Spain fell, where did the Jews go? They went to Morocco and they went to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire built for them synagogues. There are synagogues to this day in Bosnia that were built by Ottomans. I mean, this is the way the Jews were treated in the Muslim world. For 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, they were persecuted by the Romans and the Christians. And yet the Muslims have an extraordinary record. And the Jews that I have met, and I've met some very upright and honest Jews that will testify to that truth. I had a professor at San Jose State University, Mira Zuzman, who is a Jewish woman. She's an anthropologist, and she said that she owes her existence to the Muslims because she's a Sephardic Jew, and it was the Muslims that protected her people to flee from the Inquisition. So there are Jews that will recognize that. And in this country, some of the most vociferous voices now against the Israeli aggression, against the impoverished Palestinian people, are Jewish people. And that's the truth. I mean, the Pacifica Radio is one of the few radio stations where they really do talk about what's going on in Palestine and explain the aggression. Most of these people are of Jewish background. People like Dennis Bernstein, and these people, they're Jewish people. And to see these people as evil, to demonize them, is just, it's a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing. Muslims, anti-Semitism, there's no room for anti-Semitism in Islam.
Yeah. No, but I think some Muslims somehow or the other go back to the Quran and validate their craziness of never trusting the Jews or hating the Jews or fighting them or killing them. I mean, what sort of authority do they have to do that?
Well, there are definitely verses in the Quran in which the Jews are condemned. But there are verses in the Bible where the Jews are condemned. The Jews condemn themselves in their own book. They talk about how they treated their prophets, and that's exactly what the Quran is doing. It's confirming the Bible. And in fact, that's a testimony to the honesty of the Jews in relating their tradition, because they do say they did terrible things to their prophets. And so the Quran condemns that and tells them the way you redeem yourselves is accept the prophets and accept the final prophet. So that's a message to the Jews. But on the other hand, the Quran leaves that option open to them. If you don't want to accept the prophet, not only can you live under us, but we will protect you. And not only that, Muslim men are given the right to marry Jewish women. Now, how can a religion that considers every Jew evil permit a Muslim man to marry a Jewish woman, to love that woman, because the Quran says the whole purpose of marriage is rahmah and mawadda, is mercy and love. So if you have a Jewish wife, you're supposed to show love and mercy to her, and vice versa. And she's going to raise your children. And in Islamic law, if there's a divorce, the children are raised by the Jewish mother.
And the Prophet...
So how can we demonize a people by that? Right. But there are verses in the Quran that remind us that the people that have the most animosity towards Islam are the Jewish people. That doesn't mean every Jewish person. The Quran speaks in generalizations.
The occasion of the Prophet's own experience also.
But we can see clearly that there are Jewish elements within the media. Every Muslim feels the sting and arrows of these outrageous attacks by media that is often biased, and they have an agenda. There's no doubt about that, and I don't think, again, it's a conspiracy. I mean, I just look at the people writing the news articles. But on the other hand, you also have Haaretz, which is a Jewish newspaper. Haaretz in Israel condemned the F-16 bombings in editorials. Condemned the Israeli government for using F-16s. So I think within the Jewish community...
Within the Quran, though, there is also mention in an honorable way of people of the book.
People of the book, there's a verse in the Quran that says if you trust them with... there are people amongst the people of the book, if you entrust them with a little bit of wealth, you have to keep on them to make sure you get it back. But there's others, if you give them a whole bunch of wealth, they'll be trustworthy with it, which indicate they're human beings. Yeah. There's good people and bad people.
Well, on that note, thank you.